All right, this video we are going to look in a little bit more detail at the autonomic synapses and their effects and reflexes. So we're going to get into some more of the signaling and regulation of the autonomic division of the nervous system. So the synapses that we find in the autonomic division of the nervous system are going to start off with these postganglionic axons that have chains of swellings along them. Remember, axons normally don't have swellings, but they do in the autonomic system, and these are called varicosities. And for each of these, there are synaptic vesicles that are going to contain neurotransmitters. So this is where we start seeing a lot of the chemical signaling within the nervous system rather than just the electrical signaling that we see in most of the rest of the nervous system. So we get a lot of neurotransmitters here. So these are going to be in the synaptic vesicles that are right there, ready to merge with the plasma membrane of that axon terminal to release the neurotransmitters, and they will release them into that synaptic cleft, so that little space in between the axon terminal and whatever the target organ is. So that target organ, whether it's smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, or some sort of gland, there are going to be special receptors for that specific neurotransmitter. And so this is kind of like a lock and a key. So the neurotransmitter would be the lock, the receptor would, or I flipped that, sorry, neurotransmitter would be the key, the receptor would be like the lock. So there are specialized locks and keys that work together. So here's what that would look like. So these varicosities along the axon function like that axon terminal, right? So there's all of these synaptic vesicles in here containing that neurotransmitter. The target organ, whatever it is, has those receptors on it, kind of like a lock, that will pick up these keys, which are the neurotransmitters. So there are a lot of different autonomic neurotransmitters and just neurotransmitters in general. So the main two neurotransmitters of the autonomic nervous system are acetylcholine, which we have seen before with skeletal muscle contractions, but that is not acetylcholine's only job, is with skeletal muscle. And the other one is norepinephrine, also sometimes called noradrenaline. All right. And then that adrenal medulla, that is a modified sympathetic ganglion, can also release epinephrine, also known as adrenaline. All right. So we've got these three main chemicals that are functioning within the autonomic division of the nervous system. So acetylcholine can bind to a couple different types of receptors. So this is similar to kind of like a master key. So I have master keys for a lot of different labs on campus, and it's one key that can go to a bunch of different locks. And in this case, acetylcholine can bind to nicotinic and muscarinic receptors. We're not going to go into a lot of detail about what that means. It's kind of interesting if you're so inclined to look it up. But it's got a couple different types of receptors that it's able to bind to. And then norepinephrine and epinephrine bind to andrenic receptors. And so andrenic receptors can also go with other adrenal hormones. So that's where that andrin comes from, adrenal. All right. And so there's multiple subtypes of each of these type receptors. So we're not going to go into it in this particular class. It's really cool though if you're so inclined to look it up again. But depending on what type of receptor we're working with and its subtype, the molecules that get released as a result of this binding between neurotransmitter and receptor can vary a little bit. So it can either stimulate some sort of response and cause that response to happen, or it can inhibit a response from happening. All right. And so the autonomic nervous system effects are going to depend on what signaling molecule is being used and which receptor is involved. So all of the preganglionic fibers are cholinergic, and they are going to release acetylcholine, and all of the ganglionic neurons, these are the targets of the preganglionic fibers, are going to have nicotinic receptors in their cell membranes. And then most of the sympathetic postganglionic fibers, so that sympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system, they are going to be andrenic and release norepinephrine. All right, so that's coming again from the adrenal medulla, which is part of that sympathetic division, and this is going to release that epinephrine. Then in the parasympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system, we have postganglionic fibers that are cholinergic and will also release acetylcholine. And then any of the target cells, so smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, and gland tissue, can contain a lot of different types and subtypes of receptors, and so their response is going to vary depending on what type or subtype of the receptor and the neurotransmitter that connects with them. So the sympathetic postganglionic fibers that contact the blood vessels within skeletal muscles, as well as sweat glands in the skin, the integumentary system, are actually going to release acetylcholine instead of norepinephrine. This actually doesn't create any problems because there's no parasympathetic input to those particular organs. All right? If it did have both sympathetic and parasympathetic innervation to those particular structures, that can be a problem and create some conflicting responses or inhibitory effects that can cause a lot of issues. So blood vessels are going to expand or contract, which can increase or decrease blood pressure. So obviously that would not be great. So here is a quick comparison table of the sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions of the nervous system and kind of what's going on with the neurotransmitters and receptors in each of those subdivisions. So preganglionic axons found in the sympathetic division are going to release acetylcholine, and that is also going to be true in the parasympathetic division. So those preganglionic axons are going to be cholinergic and release that acetylcholine. Similar idea with the ganglionic neurons. They are going to contain nicotinic receptors, again for acetylcholine. So acetylcholine, again, can bind to multiple receptor types. That's true in both sympathetic and parasympathetic. But the postganglionic axons are where we start to see some differences. So within the sympathetic division, we again get the release of norepinephrine. This is an andrenic type, and they can also release acetylcholine, that cholinergic, but only in blood vessels of skeletal muscles and sweat glands with that acetylcholine. All right, and then the parasympathetic division, those postganglionic axons are always going to release the cholinergic acetylcholine, but again, there is no parasympathetic innervation to those blood vessels in the skeletal muscles or the sweat glands. And then that adrenal medulla only functions within the sympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system. It is not part of the parasympathetic division, but it contains muscarinic receptors for acetylcholine, and it will release epinephrine. And so again, remember, sympathetic division is that fight or flight response, that's that stress response. Parasympathetic is rest and digest, maintaining homeostasis and counteracting and returning the body to normal after activation of that sympathetic division. All right, so again, remember that parasympathetic innervation is not in blood vessels of skeletal muscle and sweat glands because that we don't need that parasympathetic innervation there. So that's why this is not a conflict between the two. All right. So there's a lot of parts of the body that are innervated by both divisions of the autonomic system. We saw that graphic in the previous video. And that effect is based on what neurotransmitters released, what receptors present. So there's parts of the heart that determine heart rate that are in contact with some of the postganglionic fibers for both systems. All right, so both of these systems here with the postganglionic fibers. All right, and if norepinephrine gets released, it can bind to the andrenic receptors, so this step right here, and that's going to cause the heart rate to increase. But if acetylcholine is released, it's going to bind to a muscarinic receptor, and that can cause the heart rate to slow. All right, and that's some of that parasympathetic innervation is slowing the heart rate back down, bringing that back to its normal resting heart rate. And so without that parasympathetic input, the heart rate would work at basically a normal rate of 100 beats per minute, and then with the sympathetic nervous system speeding that up during exercise or stressful situations, that would speed up to about 120 to 140 beats per minute. But the parasympathetic innervation allows the resting heart rate to come back down to about 60 to 80 beats per minute on average. There's some variability there depending on the individual and how good their cardiovascular health is, but again, without that parasympathetic innervation, our heart rate would stay very, very consistently elevated, and that is very dangerous. Ultimately, that can cause a lot of issues long term. All right, let's talk about autonomic tone and that dual innervation. So autonomic tone is starting to be discussed more and more within the psychology field, because this is really important for our ability to return to our resting state. So all of those organ systems need to have that balance between the sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions, because we do need stress response. Sometimes it is counterintuitive, sometimes it is not helpful, but in a lot of cases it is beneficial. So again, just simple exercise is going to trigger the sympathetic division of the nervous system to activate. All right, but exercise is good for us. So a little bit of that activation is not just normal, but beneficial. So for each of these organ systems, depending on which organ system, some of them are going to have more of a tendency to go the sympathetic or parasympathetic route for resting state, and that is autonomic tone. So what is more likely to be at play within that organ system, the sympathetic division or the parasympathetic division? So again, a lot of those organs of the autonomic system have dual innervation, so they get input from both the sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions, because we do need to be able to activate that stress response, but then bring it back down to normal to maintain that homeostasis. There are some organs where the opposing effects are achieved without the dual innervation, because there is no parasympathetic innervation there, so we have the parasympathetic division absent. All right, and so this is also going to frequently play a role with the endocrine system as well, with that regulation. Again, nervous system and endocrine system work together to help maintain homeostasis. Okay, so one example of this could be the erector pili muscles in the skin that are connected to the hair follicles, sweat glands, again, blood vessels in skeletal muscle. Those are all mostly under the sympathetic division control. All right, so we would need to increase blood flow to the skeletal muscles in times of stress, to work out, to run away from something, to fight something, things like that. But Once you remove that input from the sympathetic division of the nervous system to those blood vessels in skeletal muscle, then they're going to return to normal all on their own as soon as that signaling stops. So it doesn't need the parasympathetic innervation. So generally speaking, sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions are going to have opposite effects, but in some cases, they actually work together to achieve a particular result. So one of the prime examples of this cooperation between the two divisions actually occurs in sexual function of individuals who have X and Y chromosomes and have the organs associated with that, like a penis, testes, stuff like that. So in those reproductive organs, the blood vessels and the erectile tissue are going to be innervated with the parasympathetic division of the nervous system. So that is actually going to increase blood flow in that case rather than decrease it. But that kind of makes sense with the parasympathetic being rest and digest. Everything's fine. We're not running for our life. We're not fighting for our life, anything like that. So it would make sense that having that innervation in the erectile tissue go with the parasympathetic system, right? Because that is not going to be something that is at the top of somebody's mind when they are fighting for their life. All right. At the same time, the sympathetic nervous system is going to actually be what stimulates ejaculation by causing contractions of the seminal vesicle and prostate gland. So those two divisions work together to achieve a goal. So here is a table summarizing some different autonomic effects from the sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions of the nervous system. So kind of comparing, seeing what has innervation of just one of those divisions and what has innervation from both divisions. And again, usually we're going to have opposing effects. So with the salivary glands, the sympathetic division will inhibit saliva production and the parasympathetic will stimulate it. Blood vessels of the heart can be a little bit of an exception, so sympathetic and parasympathetic can cause vasodilation, so expanding those blood vessels, but only sympathetic is going to cause vasoconstriction and contracting those down. There is a second part to this table. Here in the slides, it's shown as just one single table in the actual textbook, but you can kind of go through this on your own. I don't want to take up too much time in this video to cover these because it's summarized very nicely in this table. All right, and we are actually going to wrap up this video here, and we will continue in the next video looking at the reflexes of the autonomic division of the nervous system and how those compare to the reflexes of the somatic division of the nervous system.